I'll give you a call as soon as I arrive. Goodbye. With silver hair and a voice that could inspire faith in heroes, Jeff Chandler was Hollywood's golden boy. However, there was a mystery behind the glitzy exterior that would plague Tinseltown for many years. The truth has come to light after years of rumors and hidden truths. Furthermore, nobody wanted to hear this narrative. The ascent to fame in Hollywood. It was not intended for Jeff Chandler to become a star. He was born Ira Grossel in 1918 in Brooklyn into a Jewish working-class family that struggled to make ends meet during the Great Depression. Young Ira had a higher aspiration than other children who aspired to be police officers or cowboys. He desired to take action. It wasn't an easy road to Hollywood for him. He gradually established his reputation after graduating from high school by working in radio and stock theater. Studio bosses believed Ira Grossel didn't sound American enough for movie marquees, so they came up with the moniker Jeff Chandler. In Hollywood in the 1940s, your birth name still had a significant influence on your career. Chandler served in the United States during World War II, Army in the hostile Aleutian Islands. He gained the discipline and toughness from the experience that would later characterize his acting style. He learned how to obey commands, perform effectively under duress, and never give up while serving in the military, skills that would come in handy in the competitive world of Hollywood. Chandler returned to radio employment after the war. He was ideal for dramatic roles on radio shows because of his rich, booming voice. His ticket to the big screen was his voice, smooth as silk yet strong enough to draw attention. After being spotted by studio officials, he soon started receiving modest roles in movies. Broken Arrow, released in 1950, was the turning point. Chandler's portrayal of Cochise, the Apache chief, would come to define his career and the way that Native American figures were portrayed in Hollywood. The portrayal of Native Americans as flat-out antagonists was not typical of Westerns. Chandler filled the part with subtlety, humanity, and dignity. He was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for the portrayal, which is a tremendous accomplishment for any actor, but particularly noteworthy in light of the racial politics of the day. Non-white characters rarely had significant roles in Hollywood, which was still mainly segregated. Chandler made history with his portrayal of Cochise. Everyone wanted to work with Jeff Chandler all of a sudden. He was ideal for a variety of roles because of his blend of emotional depth and tough masculinity. He could portray the hero in an adventure picture, the romantic lead in a drama, or the tough guy in a war movie. In contrast to other prominent men of the day, he had a distinguished appearance due to his prematurely gray hair. Chandler starred in more than 50 movies over the ensuing 10 years. He collaborated with well-known actors Maureen O'Hara, Rhonda Fleming, and Jane Russell. His flexibility and on-screen persona were demonstrated in each job. He was more than just attractive. He could carry a movie because he was a real actor. Jeff Chandler was more than just an actor, something that many people are unaware of. In addition, he had a smooth baritone voice that was on par with some of the greatest crooners of the 1950s. During his best years, he put out a number of CDs that included jazz standards and romantic ballads. His gruff guy persona on TV was softened by songs like I Should Care and All I Do Is Dream of You. Although his music career never achieved the same success as his film work, it did show another side of his creative nature. This man could croon love ballads in a recording studio that evening and play a rough and ready Apache chief in the afternoon. His contrasting abilities as a sensitive vocalist and a manly movie star would eventually be at the center of disputes regarding his private life. However, at the time, it only served to increase his attractiveness to fans who viewed him as a full-fledged performer. But as Chandler's reputation as a professional star grew, the demands of celebrity started to severely harm his personal relationship. Marriage and family issues. Jeff Chandler's personal life was collapsing behind his glitzy Hollywood facade. In 1946, when his cinematic career was only getting started, he wed actress Marjorie Hauschel. Attractive, successful, and photogenic, they appeared to be the ideal Hollywood pair. Jamie Tucker and Dana Grossel are the couple's two daughters. Chandler appeared to have managed to effectively juggle his growing profession and family life for a while, but appearances can be misleading, particularly in Hollywood. When the couple split up in 1951, the first indications of problems appeared. They made an effort to reconcile and reunite, but the issues remained. In 1954, Marjorie filed for divorce, alleging problems that gave their marriage a bleak appearance. Chandler's constant fatigue was one of her biggest grievances. She told of a man who was so exhausted that he would nod off in public, at social events, and even while chatting with friends. This person was more than just a hard worker. It was obvious that this person's health was declining. He was suffering greatly from the strains of his acting career. He was being worn down by long days on set, studio commitments, publicity trips, and the ongoing strain to uphold his reputation. Marjorie had the impression that her spouse was a ghost who was there in body but not in spirit. Chandler and Marjorie made another attempt to keep their marriage intact in spite of their issues. In the hopes that success would have provided enough stability to make things work, they got back together in March 1955. It appeared for a moment that they could be successful. However, in 1957, Raw Wind was filmed in Eden, Italy. Jeff Chandler got to meet Esther Williams, the well-known swimmer-turned-actress, who is renowned for her aquatic musicals. At this point, Williams was available, prosperous, and glamorous. One of Hollywood's most talked-about scandals would be the affair that blossomed between them. Little discretion was used in the interaction with Williams. They were photographed together, their romance was covered by gossip columnists, and the tale took center stage in entertainment news. It was the last straw for Marjorie. At the end of 1957, she filed for divorce once more, this time permanently. Chandler's financial circumstances were fascinatingly revealed during the divorce proceedings. In 1957, he was making $60,000 per film, and in 1958, he was making $75,000 per film. He earned about $250,000 in total in 1957, which includes earnings from public appearances and his singing career, but there was a cost to Hollywood's triumph. Together, his agent, business manager, and personal manager pocketed over a quarter of his earnings. When you included in the expenses of keeping up his lifestyle, taking care of his family, and paying for his job, the money soon vanished. The ultimate divorce settlement was hefty. Chandler consented to pay $500 in child support each month in addition to more than $2,100 in alimony. In addition, he paid a lump sum of $100,000, which was commensurate with the duration of their marriage and his continued prosperity. During the divorce procedures, Marjorie made some interesting remarks. She implied that Chandler was totally engrossed in his career by claiming that he spent all of his free time in his company office rather than making movies. The Esther Williams bombshell revealed that she even suffered an ulcer as a result of the strain of their failing marriage. Esther Williams and Jeff Chandler's relationship appeared to be simply another Hollywood romance for many years, passionate, glamorous, and ultimately a failure. However, everything changed when Williams released her memoirs, The $1,000,000 Mermaid, in 19. Williams shockingly claimed in the book that Chandler's confession of being a cross-dresser was the reason their relationship terminated. She claims that after he proposed marriage, he divulged this truth, and she was unable to cope with it. It was an explosive claim. Known for portraying rugged guys and military heroes, this was one of Hollywood's most manly leading males, who was suspected of secretly cross-dressing. The entertainment industry was taken aback. Chandler's friends and co-workers denied the accusations right away. There were others who shared Jane Russell's incredulity, stating that she had never heard of such a thing, and that cross-dressing was the last thing I would expect of Jeff. It was impossible for Williams to defend himself because of the timing of his revelation, which came almost 40 years after Chandler's passing. He was powerless to react to charges that threatened to completely rewrite his legacy because he had been dead for decades. Williams had every motivation to fabricate a dramatic story, which is what makes her claims especially dubious. At the time of her autobiography's publication, Hollywood tell-all novels were very popular. More copies were sold when the revelations were more alarming. Although this is still up for debate, several sources indicate that Williams eventually acknowledged lying about this assertion in her memoirs. Despite Chandler's prominence and the large number of people who knew him intimately, it is evident that no one else ever came forward to support her account. Although the claims of cross-dressing were never proven, they became part of Hollywood legend. They continue to serve as a reminder of how readily unsubstantiated allegations may harm a person's reputation, particularly when the accused is unable to defend themselves. The true tragedy of Jeff Chandler's story was still developing even as these dramatic accusations made news. Jeff Chandler was at the height of his abilities by 1961, choosing his projects carefully and commanding large salaries. He was one of Universal Pictures' biggest stars. However, years of rigorous work schedules, personal stress, and the pressure to uphold his reputation had taken their toll. Due to years of physical demands from action parts and the regular wear and tear of a busy life, Chandler started to have severe back pain. He chose to have surgery to fix a herniated disc in his spine since the agony was so bad. He went into a Culver City, California hospital on May 13, 1961, for what ought to have been a standard spinal disc procedure. He was 42 years old, still quite youthful, and in good health overall. The procedure was expected to be simple, resolve the disc issue, and allow him to resume his job, but a terrible event happened. Chandler suffered a significant hemorrhage as a result of the surgeon's unintentional injury to an artery during the lumbar discectomy. A medical emergency developed out of what ought to have been a normal treatment. Chandler had a 7.5-hour emergency surgery on May 17, only 4 days after the initial procedure. He received 55 pints of blood during this procedure, a staggering number that demonstrates the severity of the bleeding. Despite their best efforts, the medical staff was unable to save his life. On May 27, a third operation was performed and he was given 20 more pints of blood. In essence, the doctors were attempting to preserve his life, while repairing the harm caused by the initial procedure. Chandler fought for his life in the hospital for more than a month. An era came to an end, and the man who had portrayed so many powerful heroic roles was reduced to fighting a battle. The death date of Jeff Chandler was June 17. Pneumonia aggravated the blood infection, which was the stated reason. At the peak of his career, he was just 42 years old and had a lot more to offer. Hollywood and admirers worldwide were taken aback by the demise. Here was a man who had overcome many personal obstacles, survived World War II, and created a prosperous profession out of nothing. But it had all ended with a regular medical procedure. Questions were immediately raised about the circumstances surrounding his death. How does back surgery kill a 42-year-old man in good health? What went wrong with that initial procedure? Were the right procedures followed? Chandler's death was suspected of being caused by medical misconduct almost immediately. Regarding what had transpired in that operating room, friends, relatives, and business insiders started to pose challenging questions. Following an investigation, it was found that medical misconduct had taken place. In the end, Chandler's kids filed a $1.5 million lawsuit against the hospital. Later, the matter was resolved out of court for an unknown sum. However, there was a cost to the settlement. The specifics of what went wrong were kept secret as part of the deal. Decades of conjecture regarding Chandler's demise would be fueled by this concealment. There was every reason for the hospital and medical personnel to keep the information confidential. A well-known malpractice case involving a well-liked movie star might have had detrimental effects on their reputations and careers. In the 1960s, the studio structure likewise favored burying controversies rather than handling bad press. The whole tale of Jeff Chandler's passing was concealed for many years by institutional silence and legal agreement. However, subsequent medical research has shown that Chandler's case represented a turning point in the development of medical malpractice law, leading to compensation awards that were never seen before and modifications to healthcare practice. Chandler's death was specifically caused by an aortic iliac damage sustained during the lumbar discectomy. In essence, during what ought to have been a normal treatment, physicians caused significant damage to blood arteries. With careful attention to anatomy and appropriate surgical technique, this kind of harm may have been avoided. The significant blood loss that ensued implies that the surgical team was either unprepared to handle the situation or failed to recognize the damage right away. This kind of disastrous result would have been avoided with modern surgical techniques. The passing of Jeff Chandler did more than just put a stop to a bright future. It contributed to a shift in the way that medical malpractice lawsuits were handled in the U.S. The medical profession was warned that neglect would have repercussions by the public outcry over his death and the sizable payment his family got. Medical malpractice legislation underwent a sea change as a result of the case, which improved patient safety and increased provider accountability. In a way, Chandler's passing saved lives in the future by requiring advancements in patient safety and surgical techniques. However, no legal precedent could bring back the man who had given life to so many iconic roles. According to the silver-haired star's admirers, Hollywood lost one of its most dependable and adaptable leading men when he passed away. The complete tale of Jeff Chandler's death can now be recounted after almost 60 years. It was neither a terrible accident nor a weird ailment. A gifted individual lost his life at the height of his profession due to avoidable medical neglect, legal settlements and institutional cover-ups intended to preserve the reputations of those involved played a major role in the mystery surrounding his death. Behind sealed documents and secrecy agreements, the truth was always present. The fact that Jeff Chandler died as a result of a serious error made by surgeons during regular surgery and the failure to appropriately handle the repercussions was proven by recent access to medical data and legal documents. As we consider this tragedy, it is evident that Chandler's narrative reflects a complex legacy that goes far beyond the premature death of one individual. Jeff Chandler is regarded now as one of the 1950s most gifted leading men. His films are still relevant today, his performances are still captivating, and there is no denying his influence on how different characters are portrayed in Hollywood. However, his narrative also serves as a warning of how quickly carelessness can ruin lives and how institutional power can be used to conceal the truth. His death was not a mystery at all, rather it was the result of a decades-long cover-up. Esther Williams' claims of cross-dressing are still unproven and under debate. They seem to be a purposeful fiction intended to sell books or a misinterpretation. A devoted actor and a devoted father, Jeff Chandler's life was tragically interrupted by medical malpractice. When you take away the Hollywood glitz, the court cases and the dramatic accusations, you're left with the tale of a Brooklyn working-class child who rose to prominence via hard work, ability and perseverance. Jeff Chandler never lost sight of his origins or his dedication to his art. He was a man who took his obligations to his fans, his craft and his family very seriously. A man straining himself too hard to support his family and keep up his career was the cause of the chronic weariness that exacerbated his marital issues, not laziness or apathy. Jeff Chandler's death was tragic not just because he passed away too soon, but also because it was unnecessary. A life should never have been lost as a result of a normal medical treatment carried out with care. The ensuing cover-up made the tragedy worse by depriving his fans and family of the truth they were due. The hidden costs of Hollywood success are exemplified by Chandler's narrative. The stress and health issues that finally brought him to that hospital bed in 1961 were caused by a number of circumstances, including the need to maintain an image, the demanding work schedules, and the personal sacrifices necessary to stay on top. The 1950s studio setup was especially rigorous. Stars were supposed to labor non-stop, keep up flawless public personas, and never display any signs of weakness or vulnerability. Seldom was the impact this had on their health and personal life recognized or addressed. Jeff Chandler's decision to follow Hollywood's norms ultimately cost him dearly. He lost his marriage, his health, and eventually his life as a result of his commitment to his work. He was destroyed by the same system that made him famous. The impact of Jeff Chandler's passing on Hollywood went much beyond the obvious sadness of losing a well-liked celebrity. The events leading up to his death revealed serious weaknesses in the way the entertainment business as a whole handles the welfare and medical treatment of its stars. Studios had been treating their greatest stars more like commodities than like people with actual health needs and weaknesses for decades. Hollywood was forced to face hard realities about how it had been managing star health crises during the golden age after medical misconduct was discovered in Chandler's case. How many other actors had endured silent suffering while enduring sicknesses and injuries in order to satisfy studio demands? How many had been denied proper medical treatment because their worth as commodities was more important than their human welfare? After spending millions on Chandler's career, Universal Pictures was suddenly confronted with the question of whether the studio system's unrelenting pace was a factor in his demise. For the first time, the industry began to seriously examine the pressure to put box office profits ahead of people's health, to labor through pain and to maintain appearances at all costs. Chandler's negligence case established a precedent that also significantly altered the way well-known people, including celebrities, viewed healthcare. Because their patients were well-known, hospitals and physicians could no longer presume that their errors would go unpunished. The sizable payment given to Chandler's family made it very evident that notoriety or fortune absolved medical practitioners of responsibility. This change had a long-term effect on how the entertainment business managed the health of its stars. In order to ensure that on-set injuries were properly treated and that performers weren't under pressure to deal with significant health conditions, studios started putting in place better medical guidelines for their actors. The days of asking celebrities to endure silent suffering in order to meet production deadlines were coming to an end.
Chandler's passing also occurred at a time when American society's perception of authority and institutional power was changing more broadly. Chandler's lawsuit served as an early illustration of how common people could use the legal system to hold powerful institutions accountable as the 1960s started to question established hierarchies. The fact that his family's lawsuit was successful demonstrated that even big studios and hospitals could be held accountable for their errors. For Chandler's peers, the psychological effects were just as profound. Stars such as Tony Curtis, Rock Hudson, and other prominent men of the day abruptly realized that fame and wealth did not shield them from their own mortality. Many started being more cautious about the dangers they took in their professional lives, seeking second views on medical procedures and treating their health more seriously. The evil side of Hollywood's image management apparatus was also brought to light by the cover-up surrounding Chandler's death. The same marketing machine that had made Chandler famous put in extra effort to downplay the controversy surrounding his passing, in order to shield medical professionals and studio interests at the expense of truth and accountability. Press agents, studio executives, and legal teams worked together to make sure the whole story stayed hidden. For many years to come, Hollywood scandals would frequently feature this pattern of institutional protection, even when lives were lost or harmed in the process. The Chandler case set a precedent for how powerful interests could cooperate to control harmful information, repress difficult facts, and save their own reputation. More cruelly, Chandler's passing cost the movie business a performer who was just finding his creative footing. By the age of 42, he had developed into a performer who could handle roles that were more complicated. He appeared to be moving beyond the conventional leading man roles of the 1950s, as evidenced by the depth and nuance of his later works. One of Hollywood's great what-if stories is represented by the projects he had planned and the performances he never got to give. The answer to the enigma surrounding Jeff Chandler isn't what anyone was hoping for. Only decades of cover-up and medical negligence, no grand plot or secret scandal. The truth shows how quickly lives can be lost and how authority can be abused to conceal unpleasant facts. Chandler was worthy of more than the stories that followed his death. How do you feel about Hollywood's secrecy culture in terms of safeguarding influential organizations? If Jeff Chandler's story had taken place in the era of social media, do you think it would have turned out differently? Leave a comment below with your opinion.